Good morning. We're going to be jumping right into Matthew chapter 5. We touched on this last time a little bit, but I want to spend a bit more time talking about the blessings and then take us into the sort of a transition point. And then we'll probably pick up the pace a little bit from the rest of chapters 5, 6, and 7. So you guys want to go ahead and read through the end of chapter 7, that'd be a good thing, just to be familiar. But as we said last time, we covered this quite a bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but just as a recap, the people, after Matthew introduces us to Jesus, and he has this big moment of apocalypse or revelation at the baptism. Jesus goes into the wilderness and is tested, and that reveals and authenticates who he is. And then he immediately comes out and begins announcing the kingdom, teaching in and around Galilee. We talked about that. It's a large area. It wasn't, the same as he went to one place and then all these followers showed up. The followers came because he traveled around the region, right? And had this message that he preached. And at some point, he goes and starts to call people specifically to follow him. In a unique and special way. So when he goes and calls Peter, and Andrew and James and John and the fishermen, right? And then we have Jesus not quite, at this point in Matthew's story, we don't have sort of the full, sort of apostles as we think of them. We have a less organized group of people that Jesus had. We'll talk more about how that emerges and what that means. But the point is, right now, his first messages are about the kingdom. And that's so important to get. It's about the kingdom. And then, because of what he's been doing, the same way his identity was claimed by Matthew at the baptism, and then authenticated through the revelation in the testing. The message Jesus has about the kingdom comes with it more than just some catchy teaching. He is going around, and it also says reaching out to the bottom of the pyramid we had in terms of society, the expendables and those who don't matter, reaching out to them, healing them, specifically speaking to and calling them first into the kingdom. Now that is not to say, to be very clear about this, that is not to say that if you are north on the pyramid in society, you're excluded from the kingdom, because Matthew himself sits quite a bit higher on the pyramid than most of the folks who follow Jesus. Matthew's a pretty wealthy fellow. He gets that through by his position as a tax collector. We know there's other rich folks who are invited into the kingdom. Jesus spends quite a bit of time with a man named Nicodemus, somebody who sits on the Sanhedrin, the very religious body that both John the Baptist and Jesus strictly judge and denounce, right? And yet we have members of that body invited into the kingdom, because everybody is invited. But there is something to be said, I think, about where the announcement and where the focus is first. And I think that kind of speaks into sort of a bigger ethic about who we are as people who are a part of the kingdom, and where should we ensure that the message is heard. Anyways, I think the next event you have after Jesus travels around is he goes to Capernaum. He moves to Capernaum. It says he dwells there. And I take that, the word dwelling means to live there. And I take it to mean that he actually lived there. I used to never think about where Jesus lived. He never had a house. I remember that the phrase he used, foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. But that's a message to a specific group of people about what it was going to mean to follow him in that special way, because not everybody had to leave everything, right? 99.9% of the people that heard his message lived their life where they were, right? But my point is, I just never thought about him actually sort of, where did he live and what was it like and all that kind of stuff. But it says he moved to Capernaum, and so he was well known there. He goes to Capernaum. He goes on a hill, some sort of a mountain, kind of place near the Sea of Galilee, and begins to teach. I think last time we covered the fact that there's an unmistakable, because the word used is mountain, it's unmistakable that you have a teacher on a mountain, right? Having the echo all the way back to Moses at Sinai, where the law is received. Like you got to have that in your head, because that's an echo that Matthew's giving us. If he would have said, he just went to the hillside, then maybe the echo was not as strong. But saying he goes to a mountain, it's like, oh, okay, this is clearly, when you think back about where are teachers on mountains in the Bible, right? And Moses is the obvious example there. So he goes and he begins to teach, and so we said this last time, right? And we have the list here. There's a lot smarter people than I that have thought about how this works. But I'll tell you just a couple of things that I've bumped into that I think really helps me think about this list. I used to always kind of hear it as the ideal of who I needed to be as a Christian. Like, you're never going to perfectly get there, but you should aspire to get there. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad takeaway from this list. Though I would argue it's not the only thing, right? And that's kind of, what I like to try to do is help people add things to their experience of the Bible. I'm not trying to take things away from your experience. And the thing that I think I said last time that really sort of has impacted me most recently is thinking about the people who are described right before these words come out of Jesus' mouth from the mountain are that lower part of that pyramid, the people who don't matter, right? And the people who most likely wouldn't have described themselves as blessed with God. And there's quite a bit to be said about thinking about when he says these words. Yes, they can be aspirational, and that, hey, these are some things you want to, attain to, but some of them don't make sense enough. And I don't think Jesus calls you to mourn. Like, he doesn't want you to walk around sad all the time. He's not calling you to go ensure that you're going to place yourself in harm's way. All right. So there's a bit of a tension there. So it's like that's a signal that maybe there's something you need to another way to look at it that could help flesh out kind of what all he might have meant. And I think in hearing the fact that the who that Jesus that Matthew described as being there, and there could be others. I'm not excluding that somebody higher on the pyramid, a wealthy person or whatever, was there hearing as well. Like, I'm fairly certain at least the local scribes and teachers from the synagogue in Capernaum probably would have gone and listened to what he said. Now, I say all that because imagine the other angle, instead of this being aspirational, imagine these words being described as you are blessed, even though you don't think you are, and the world that you live in currently definitely doesn't describe you as you're anything but blessed. And he's sort of speaking directly to them, calling them blessed, is a kind of, in itself, a reversal of their status. I mean, just the fact that that's who Matthew has set up as the primary audience, and then Jesus is telling this primary audience, no, you are blessed, and to be blessed is to be, valued and loved by God. For them to hear that as the lone voice in a sea of voices that only tell them that they do not matter, and that nobody cares about them. Rome is in charge. I don't know where your God is, but we're here now, and you guys stay down there. You don't count. And to have somebody sort of lift them up with the dignity and say, no, you all actually matter quite a bit. I think it's powerful. It's not the only point of view. I want to be clear about that. But as I began to sort of think about this more, it's like, that would be so liberating and sort of just giving a sense of worth and value to people who must not have really felt this way. And it probably set up a lot of tension. Like, I could imagine myself sitting there and easily, especially if I'm on, as an example, maybe I can't walk, right? Maybe I'm laying, I'm there, and I hear that I'm blessed, and I don't know how long this event lasts, right? This teaching lasts, no more than an afternoon, okay? And so I have to go somehow get, home. and my normal life starts back up the next day and I still can't walk, and man, this doesn't feel very blessing to me. You know what I mean? So there's a tension that's also set up there, I think, too, in terms of the hearers of, hey, there's a measure of buying into or trust in this as well. And so as we think about this, just who is the person hearing, and sort of how are they described in the blessings that are given? There's 9 of them. And then what's the immediate impact? So a couple of things. The first one we have is poor in spirit, right? So we talked a little bit about this poor in spirit. Could be, again, multiple dimensions. Poor in spirit could be on one end of the, well, I don't know, let's stop. Let's ask, what do you guys think it could possibly mean? No wrong answers, just because poor in spirit's a pretty imprecise term. What do you hear when you hear poor in spirit?
Hopeless. Hopeless.
Oh, okay, hopeless. Interesting. Okay, I like that. Hopeless. Anybody else?
Like depressed.
Okay, hopeless, depressed, kind of in the same space. Let me give you another example. What if it were people who didn't feel very spiritual? Like, what if it were people who weren't allowed to go to the local, because most of these folks here in Capernaum, in Galilee, are Jewish. What if they weren't allowed into the synagogue? Like, they might not feel very spiritual in terms of being able to participate in their understanding the way they've heard that they're supposed to participate in the worship and the belief system of God, in particular, the God of Israel. So imagine if they were sort of excluded, by nature of, well, you got this weird disease that makes you have seizures or something. You must not be worthy to be in here. It's interesting. 150 or so years before Jesus, there's, and I'll thank Tim Mackey for bringing this example up. There was a guy who was thought of as possibly the Messiah 150 years before Jesus. And so this was not uncommon. There were people after Jesus that were thought of as the Messiah. This particular gentleman also was named Jesus, Joshua, Yeshua, in other words, the same name, and also taught. There's a kind of interesting parallel. If you were to list the things that he taught, a big chunk of it would sound extremely familiar. It would sound just like the Bible. You could grab it right out of Proverbs. You could grab some of it out of Exodus or Deuteronomy, and it would resonate. But then there was a few things that he says that are interesting in the teachings of this other Jesus that were not at all like what you're seeing on the screen. Like some of the teachings would say things like, and I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact quotes. His name was Jesus ben Sirach, Jesus son of Sirach, or Sirach maybe. And these writings exist. They existed and they influenced, and people thought about them and commented on them. And they were known in the time of Jesus for sure. But Jesus ben Sirach would say something like, you are blessed when you have victory over your enemies. You are blessed when people want to hear what you have to say. You are blessed when you have a lot of friends. You are blessed when you are successful in what you do. Does any of those things look like that stuff right there? The easy answer is no. Right? It doesn't look anything like this. None of those things say, I've conquered anybody, or I've won anything, or people care about what I think, right? And so there's an interesting thing there, right? That maybe Jesus ben Sirach was missing the mark, or maybe his teaching was representative of a broader train of thought within Judaism, which really did believe that the successful, etc., were blessed with God, and those who weren't were cursed for some reason. There must be a reason, right? You guys remember? And I forget the passages unless I go back and read it myself. I always forget the reference. You guys, a familiar story in the Bible is, Jesus encounters somebody, and the question is, who did sin that this man is afflicted? Him or his parents? I can't remember if it's a blind man or a lame man, one of the two, right? But think about that. That was good. That's a good little nugget right there in the gospel. Now, I bet we're going to encounter it actually later, where you have sort of the general, it exposes a way of thinking, right? Oh, this person over here is afflicted in some way. They must have done something to deserve it, right? And so I think in some ways, when you think about that just general construct and that trajectory of thinking, that the successful are blessed with God and those who aren't, therefore must be judged by God, and then you stack this up against right beside it, there's a definite conflict there, right? Jesus is saying the opposite. Now, all those people that you would normally say, they must have been cursed by God for something, he's saying, no, you're blessed. Right? A powerful, I think just a revolutionary, powerful thing, transformational thing kind of here. And that's why oftentimes you'll hear be described as the kingdom being completely inverted. The ones at the bottom of that pyramid are the first ones who are invited in to be part of it. Right? And I think I said this last time too, just thinking about the ones who encountered the risen Christ first. Women. Right? Sorry ladies, but in that time, lower up on the pyramid. Think about that. The first, there was something that was said. We watched a movie last night, and it was, anyways, you don't care about that. The point is, there's a phrase that has happened that has been used before, that the women who encountered the tomb were actually the first apostles to be apostles. Like they are the first ones who met the criteria to actually be apostles, which is to have been present with Jesus in his ministry, and then encountered him after the resurrection. Those are the two criteria, right? And so those women are actually the very first among them all, right? Which in and of itself is an inversion to some degree, right? So real quick, I want to talk about this poor spirit. So my point there, long tangent to say, this may have been people who felt they couldn't even attempt to encounter and connect with God in the ways that they understood they were supposed to, because of who they were. Right? So they may feel completely, forgotten and rejected by God, or at the very least, they feel unable to participate in the way Judaism works as a community. It's a group of 12 tribes, and that's really important. Family identity and being there is super important. Just by the way, as it is today in our faith tradition. But they were excluded. So imagine feeling like that and then hearing the first people, right? The first people who probably feel the furthest from God, Jesus saying, no, you guys are blessed. And man, I can't even go and do it right. I have seizures and people don't want to be around me, so I can't even go to the synagogue and do the offerings or listen to the psalms sung. I can't even hear the teaching. And I'm what? Think about God reaching out to those who are kind of quote-unquote farthest away. We talked a little bit last time about those who are hungry for righteousness. Righteousness, I just want to be really clear about this. Do not only hear that as the epitome of the perfect religious person. Okay? Don't hear it that way. Righteousness, in its broader sense, as you look at it throughout the Old Testament, which is all you have when you're in this point in Matthew, right? None of the in the story, right? Righteousness is about, yes, it is about being right, but not being right in and of yourself, and therefore you have checked all the check marks on the list, and therefore I am righteous, and all these other people aren't. Righteousness is much more about the relationship. Are you in a right relationship with God and with people? So sort of vertically and horizontally, super important. If you go look at the Ten Commandments, they are a template that describe exactly that model. The first commandments are what? They're all about God. Don't worship other gods, don't have idols, etc. Right? That's vertical, being in the right relationship with God. But then what are the rest of them about? don't kill, don't steal, etc., which are horizontal about people. And then they get expounded upon in the other 600 plus commandments that are out there. But that is righteousness. And righteousness is also, and especially if you go read the Psalms, a desire for things that are currently wrong to be made right. Which is why oftentimes judgment in the Old Testament, while sometimes paradoxically is longed for, because it is in the judgment that the wrong is identified and the trust that Yahweh is going to fix it. He's going to make it right. He's going to turn the wrong into right. It's a reversal. So if you kind of were to sort of strip away the specifics, that idea of reversing things that are wrong are all over the way and how Jesus teaches. And that should not be surprising, because what did he live, breathe, and himself author in a lot of different ways? The whole Bible, right? So it's, anyways, the point is, hunger for righteousness is to hunger for the moment when all things are made right. Who are people who are living in a place where things do not feel right for them at all. They're in the promised land. They're descendants of Abraham, members of the covenant, and yet there's Gentile folks running the show. And even the folks that are running their part of the Judaism show don't seem to be very much in alignment with the scriptures that they hear. Right? So to hunger for righteousness is to desire things that are right, which means they don't have it right now. And so the promise that they have, right, if the first promise is the kingdom is yours right now, you count right now, their promise is you'll live in righteousness because you will now do what you can to bring the righteousness. If you're in the kingdom, then therefore you begin to do the small things. Like, it is a small beggar from some outskirts of Capernaum going to go overthrow the Roman government? No. But he can do stuff in his field. Right? He can make things right in his community. Right? Mourners will be comforted. Those who mourn, that's not just being sad because your puppy died. Though I would argue that's included. It's just not sufficient. The idea of mourning the current state of affairs, the idea of mourning that things are not right. And then the meek, why are the things aren't right in and around their environment? Because of those who are not in power, the meek, the gentle, will inherit everything. In that day and time, and in our day and time too, power is acquired at the expense of somebody else. Like, there's not just like this substance of power that exists out there, and I go out there and I bag it all up, and I have a huge bundle of power that's mine, and all of a sudden I can do things. It always comes at somebody else's expense, right? If we were like imagine us being a little city ourselves, right? If I'm the only one with the means to give you guys breakfast, I own the coffee, the hot chocolate, and the donuts. I have the ability to leverage that and get things that I want. And you guys can do stuff for me. I give you breakfast. That's a form of power. It comes at your expense, right? Power is an interesting thing to think about. And these three together are again, not only, but in the context that they're living, in their sort of socio-economic, political context, these three taken together are a powerful statement about a promise that things will get fixed. And in the meantime, you can, because the kingdom is yours now, do the things that you can do to help realize the righteousness, to help comfort those who are hurting, and to protect those who have been taken advantage of. You see what I'm saying? So this is important, right? To kind of group these things together, connect them to the bigger thing. These next two, mercy and peacemakers. So merciful, what's mercy again? Come on, y'all. Mercy. Somebody. Yes. So, I mean, yes, it entails forgiveness, but mercy is something more specific. Okay, Eva stole from me $1,000. The thing that would make that right, the just thing that would occur, is that somehow, some way, Eva restores my $1,000. Right? Isn't that the mess? Right? Y'all agree? Mercy is me not requiring that of her. Okay? Mercy is withholding sometimes the things that are actually justly deserved for the benefit of the other. Right? Often sometimes, not often, sometimes at the cost of the one giving the mercy. Merciful shall be given mercy. To give somebody mercy, like if you're truly guilty, like, you know, if Eva's truly guilty of stealing my money, and maybe it crosses her mind about what that says about her as a person, that she would take my stuff, and that she could just do it and not seem to have much of a care about it at first. At some point, maybe she begins to question who she is and what kind of person am I? And then I say, you know what? Don't worry about it. We're good. I'm not mad. To your point, mercy often involves a forgiveness as part of the thing. But imagine what that does to her. In the moment when she sort of is starting to crumble as a person, then to have mercy given is actually a liberation out of, you know, that black hole of man, I'm way past. I can't be this kind of person. You see what I'm saying? So mercy is sort of in itself a liberation of removal of guilt and fear, and is inherently an affirmation of value of the other person. You see what I'm saying, how this works? This is powerful, which is one of the reasons why we hear things like that God loves us. If we ponder that for even just a little bit, it should just have all those things along with it, right? To imagine, what's the point? Why would he love me? I don't deserve it, and that's in itself part of the point. You know. Anyways, peacemakers. Those who peacemakers it's interesting because they're called into the family of God. So this is an interesting thing as we begin to think about this. You're in the kingdom, but now you're also in the family. Huge, huge theological thing there, where this is not. This is different. This relationship, this covenant relationship, is different in that now you're a family. You are a son or a daughter. And therefore, everyone in the kingdom is therefore equally a brother or a sister. All right? See what I'm saying? These two things right here have the idea of you are now part of and equal with, but also a call to a responsibility to do these things because you're in the kingdom. Make the peace so that the family is whole. To be merciful so that others will feel forgiven and valued, right? The last two, just to kind of wrap these up, the last two are results. They are not promises, they are not calls to go get yourself arrested in the name of Jesus. That is not a smart thing, because if you want the rest of this, if everybody did that, the kingdom's going to have a hard time growing, right? The point of it is, these things set you up as a different person, a member of a family in the kingdom. And if you go read specifically the very next passages right after these, you'll understand what I'm saying. They set up a tension. Because Jesus didn't call people out to then go leave where they lived, to go far away somewhere else and establish a new kingdom somewhere else so that they could do things right. Right? The utopia version we've seen repeated many, many times across history, never works out. He didn't do that. He wanted the people to stay where they were and to be members of the kingdom. Right? He didn't ask them to leave. Go follow me to, I don't know, the island of Cyprus, somewhere far away. And we'll establish our new kingdom here. Be separate. He's saying, no, you guys are going to be right here. And therefore, because my kingdom is different, because of these things above, you're going to bump in, you're going to have collisions and conflicts and tension because the world that you're living in is not the kingdom that I'm calling you to be part of. And there's going to be an intersection, and I just, again, thank you to Tim Mackey for his great analogy, since I've actually lived this one out, I can attest to it. It's like, I bet nobody here, has anybody here driven on the wrong side of the road like in another country?
Yeah.
You. Did you do it, Presley?
Mm.
It is, and it is hard. It is hard because you spend most of your time driving on the right side of the road. And so your brain and your whole muscle memory works that way. But then to have that flipped over into a mirror image takes a considerable amount of mental capacity just to adjust. Right? It doesn't feel right, even though it's the same road and you still have four tires, an accelerator, brake, and a wheel. It all works the same. It's just you're on the wrong part, and you're looking at things at different angles, and that really messes with your brain. That's what this is like, right? And in those cases, like, I myself came close to having my own set of collisions because I was driving on the wrong side of the road. Like, it's such a mind bender, right, to do that. That's what these are about. These aren't calls to go find a way to get yourself going to prison for Jesus. These are, the kingdom is yours now. So when you're persecuted, understand that's part of the deal. That because my kingdom is so different than the one out there. And when you are persecuted and you do pay a cost, right, therefore, that does not mean you have a loss. Because you are greatly rewarded in value. When you give something up of your own to live out the kingdom and pay a price for that, right? It is precisely because of these things above, you're not rewarded in value because, hey, you lost your job because you're a Christian. Therefore, when you get to heaven, they're going to give you extra crowns or something. I mean, I believe that will be honored and recognized and you will be made whole by God. Yes, that's not the point of this thing. I think the point of it is, if you have stood in those moments when you had to either choose the kingdom of Jesus or the kingdom of the world, and you lost, you're rewarded in value for that decision, right? Like that is to be commended, right? And how that works later in the new heaven, I don't know how that works in the new heaven, new earth. I don't know, right? I don't know if you're going to care about losing your job or whatever in this present world when you're already living in the new heaven. I don't know how that works. What I'm saying is it's not a call to do those things. It's a recognition that as a member of the family in the kingdom, you are standing there now. Now your value, you're going to be greatly working value exists now, right? Because if you're standing, you're in the family, you're in the kingdom. So anyways, these are the 9 blessings. Read the rest of it. Particularly just think very carefully about the next couple of verses and what it means for those verses to follow this. Okay? That's super, super important to get. I want you guys to encounter that on your own, and then we'll come back and talk about probably the rest of 5 and something of 6, and I'm kind of land the plane on these things and move on. But this is fundamental. Like Matthew is setting up these events with some teaching. There'll be some more events with some teaching, etc. 5 times throughout the book of Matthew. So this is kind of one of the bookends of the series. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys are getting stuff out of this. Please read Matthew along with us. And if you miss anything, I'm going to start posting the videos here pretty soon now that we've gotten several underneath our belt. Anyways, let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for allowing us to study your word. Help us to understand who it is we are as followers of your Son, and help us to live out the kingdom as you envision it here now in our community. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.